Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
Welcome back. I'm Frank Agin, founder and president of AmSpirit Business Connections, and your host of this episode of the Networking RX. Thanks again for listening, subscribing, and referring others, and certainly thanks for the comments and questions you have sent in. Before we get started, remember we're looking to add quality people to our stable of franchisees. This is a unique franchise opportunity in that it's geared for aspiring entrepreneurs or professionals to add on to what they're already doing. Again, all of our franchisees do something else for just a couple hours in the morning, a few mornings a week. Our franchisees operate the AmSpirit Business Connections program. The rest of their week, they're accountants, attorneys, financial advisors, realtors, coaches, and consultants of various kinds. If you're interested or know someone's interested, contact me. There's an email in the show notes, or you can use one provided at the end of the podcast. I was at a networking function a few weeks back and standing around talking to people. I guess we'll call ourselves regulars. These are people that I see at these events from time to time. I see them a lot of times. They're there and they're students of networking. They're mentors of networking. They are certainly people I consider to be good at networking. And so we kind of got on the conversation talking about my podcast, things I talk about, different topics and whatnot. And somebody suggested you need to come up with a program that is geared towards networking don'ts. We talk a lot about things that what people should do. How about talking about the networking don'ts? So we just started throwing ideas around and came up with 6.5 networking don'ts, the title of this program, 6.5 networking don'ts. Why half? I don't know. It sounded good. And you'll see when we get to the end, it's kind of one of those, do we really put this in or not? But we did, so it's 6.5. The first networking don't is don't act desperate. People want to associate and be associated with helping you succeed. They don't want to be responsible for or ensuring that you survive professionally. I should say, not just survive in general. And so if you act as if the networking relationship is going to make or break you, you'll likely have a lonely networking existence. So, I get it. You're out there, and maybe this doesn't apply to you, but pass this message on to whomever. You're out there, and you're hungry. You need a sale. You need to eat. You need to pay the rent, you need to do whatever, you need to meet quota, whatever it is, and that's fine. I understand all that. I think we've all been there, but networking is not geared towards making short-term goals happen. It's just not. That's not what it's really for. Networking is about developing relationships, and relationships take time to build. Now, again, I understand that you might have to make a sale. I can appreciate that. Just because you have to make a sale doesn't change the underlying dynamics of how relationships are formed. In other words, you can't speed up the process of developing a relationship. So the first networking don't is don't act desperate. Along these same lines, with close corollary to this, the second networking don't is don't sell. Networking is about establishing and building relationships, as I've mentioned in this program and lots of other programs that I've done on the Networking RX podcast. It's not about prospecting or selling products or services. Those who attempt to sell before it's appropriate experience very little long-term networking success. I mean, stop and think about it. People... When you approach people too soon with respect to the sale, even when it's kind of backhanded, you start asking probing questions, and everybody knows, you know what you're doing. You know you're trying to drive something towards a pitch, or when people are trying to drive things towards a pitch, and people are generally pretty astute in knowing what's going on. If you're talking to somebody and they're a financial advisor, or you're talking to somebody and they're a realtor. I got this the other day. I had somebody connecting with me on LinkedIn, and very short order with these messages going back and forth. The question was, what are my real estate goals? I know where we're headed with this. I know where this is going. I've never had anybody ask that question, to be perfectly honest, but I knew where it was going, and it's like, okay, I'm not going to be baited into this. And I'm always a little uneasy when I feel like people are heading me down a certain path. So networking relationships are not about selling. We do business with those we know, like, and trust, and I've indicated in other podcast episodes, develop the relationship, and the sales will come. When people are comfortable with you, they'll look to do business with you. They'll look to refer you. But you got to take your time. Along the same lines, don't ask too soon. Certainly, networking is about giving, but it's also about getting to. And certainly, there's nothing wrong with tapping into your network from time to time, but you can't ask too soon. You can't push that relationship along too soon. So you need to take the time to make sure that the relationship is comfortable. And again, once that happens, then you can start to ask things. And it doesn't necessarily have to be about sales, but it might be, hey, I need some assistance. For example, recently I was kind of stuck with just how I would approach certain things. I needed some advice. I don't need to get into the ins and outs of that. And I was really trying to search for who I could really tap into that would help me with this advice, somebody who would have some experience. And there were a couple people that were potentially candidates, and I really wanted to think it through as, do I have enough of a relationship with these people to ask them for what it will amount to, 30 minutes to an hour of their time to kind of talk about issues that I have. And so, those are things that you need to kind of work through in your mind, and you can't necessarily do that too soon in the relationship. And there's no rule of thumb as to how long is too soon or enough time. It depends. It depends on what the ask is. It depends on who the person is. It depends on how the relationship is moving along. But in your heart of hearts, you certainly know when people are coming at you when it's too soon. You kind of need to think through that same thing in your own mind. So the second networking don't is don't sell. The third networking don't is don't monopolize. At the very worst, you should have an equal split between when you're speaking and when you're listening. Remember, the more you're yammering on about yourself, the more self-centered you appear, and the less you appear to have to offer. And I think we've all been in those conversations where the person is just talking and talking and talking. And I was in one recently, and I was kind of sitting and listening to the person, and I really got the sense that the person was insecure. I kind of felt bad for him after a while, because it's, they could take a breath, and it was like, okay, what do I got to talk about now? And it was kind of unfortunate. They were a nice person, certainly getting to know them and kind of like them, don't necessarily trust them. But they were kind of stuck where they were kind of monopolizing, and they were just talking about, they were carrying the conversation. Everything that was said, they seemed to have the first and final word. Along those same lines, don't just talk about you. No one is so interesting that they can or should consume the entire subject matter of a conversation. Keep it interesting. Talk about you, talk about them, talk about others, kind of break it up. But when it's a monologue about you and you, it grows tiring real quickly. Tom Anderson, who's somebody I've interviewed on this program early on, he kind of has a saying or a joke. If you've listened to my interview with Tom Anderson, you can just tell he's a fun guy. I'm telling you, he's a fun guy. But whenever he encounters people like that, he'll kind of remark afterwards, and his little joke is, well, enough about me. What do you think about me? And it's funny, but there are people out there that just they need to monopolize and they need to kind of talk about themselves, and everything kind of points back to them. As time goes on, and I get to really kind of study people and see what they're all about, I sense that people who need to kind of monopolize conversations, there's an insecurity there, and to a degree, it bothers me, but also to a degree, I feel sorry for them because there's something there standing in their way. But from a networking perspective, it really does hurt them because people don't want to associate with them. I mean, who wants to walk into a conversation and hear nothing about what somebody has to say about themselves? Of course, we don't. And so you need to kind of mix it up. So the third thing is don't monopolize, and a corollary to that, 3A and 3B. The second part of that is just don't talk about yourself. The fourth thing is don't interrupt. To be an effective networker, you need to be a proficient listener. Obviously, if you're interrupting, you're not listening very well. You're thinking about what you want to say. Let people talk. And there's nothing wrong with redirecting the conversation. Don't steer it towards something to sell them, but there's nothing, oh, you mentioned this, I'd really like to explore that. There's nothing wrong with that. But let people get their thoughts out. Certainly don't be argumentative, but just let people get their thoughts out. And you need to kind of think of ways to kind of guard against that. I mean, I have to bite my tongue from time to time. Not that I'm interrupting people to disagree with them or something like that, but I've got something to add and I don't want to forget. There's time. You just got to have to relax, and you might miss it and come back to it later. But I've never really kind of been in a situation where, geez, if I don't say this thing and it's lost somehow or another forever or just for the short period that it's that dire. But so don't interrupt is number 4. Number 5, don't pry. Although we need to learn about others en route to developing of solid networking relationships, we should endeavor to not get more information than they're willing to share. And sometimes people will stop short of telling everything that you want to know, and you can ask a question, and if they kind of avoid that question or kind of talk around what you're looking towards, just take a hint that it's heading into an area they don't want to talk about. Maybe it's a failed relationship, maybe it's a failed business, maybe it's a failed whatever it can be. They may talk about it in time, or they may never talk about it in time, but prying to try and get that information out is really counterproductive. It starts to make them uncomfortable, and obviously you can't have a good relationship with people that you're making uncomfortable. So again, number 5 is don't pry. Let's do a quick recap here. Number 1, don't act desperate. Number 2, don't sell. Number 3, don't monopolize time. Number 4, don't interrupt. And then number 5, don't pry. Number 6 is simply don't show off or brag. I guess it's kind of going back to talking about you. But no one likes a show off or somebody who brags. And since networking is all about getting people to know you, like you, and trust you, I don't know that I need to say a whole lot more on that, though I will. There certainly is much to that. Along the lines of don't show off or brag, don't misrepresent yourself. Misrepresenting yourself is akin to a lie. What I mean by misrepresenting yourself, just situations where you try and make yourself out to be something more than you are. I mean, if you got a home office, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing shameful about it. In many degrees, I know people out there with very successful businesses, they just don't need to have a real estate expense. So it's really kind of smart. So you don't need to represent that it's anything more than it is. Because when you start getting into these little misrepresentations or these little lies, there's a saying out there, to conceal a lie, you need to have 15 other lies. And then to conceal those lies, you're going to need a total of 225 more. And so it just kind of compounds itself. Eventually, the slightest exaggerations will be revealed, and you quickly destroy any and all credibility. So, the best thing is you don't need to be totally honest. Hey, I got no money in my bank account or anything like that. I don't need to say that, but don't imply that you're $1 million business if you're not. Don't imply that there are things happening in your business that just aren't. Just let it be what it is, and there's no shame in that. For me, AmSpirit Business Connections, we have 15 franchisees. I would love to say it was 150. I really would, but it's 15. And when I talk to people, at times, I don't want to say I feel bad about it, but I'm not, it's not that I'm not proud of it. I just wish it were more, but I never kind of intimate that it's more than what it is, because people are going to find out, and then, if they find out that, hey, you've misrepresented this, what else might you have misrepresented? It really kind of taints everything. And along the same lines, don't, promise what you can't deliver. Again, when you're misrepresenting yourself, you're really kind of putting out there something that can't possibly happen. So, with respect to number 6, don't show off or brag. Don't misrepresent yourself. Don't promise what you can't deliver. Don't paint yourself. Don't paint a picture of yourself that you can't live up to. In the long run, it only hurts you. So that's 6. What's the 1/2? The 1/2 is don't be discouraged. And again, I was debating whether to include that or not as we were talking about it. People threw that out there, as a networking don't be discouraged. I don't know if it fits or not, but I will talk about it. Know this: everything you do with respect to your network will somehow, some way come back to you. But you need to understand that very little, if any, will come back to you tomorrow or next week or in the moment. You're at an event, you're expecting for something to come back to you. It might be months, it might be years. So you just kind of need to keep after it. And so don't go to an event and walk away in a huff like, well, I didn't get anything out of it. Don't have an expectation that you need to get anything out of it. There may be nothing apparent about what happens there that's going to benefit you. You're just building relationships and solidifying those relationships. And in time, it'll add up. It'll add up significantly. You just can't necessarily see it happening as it's happening. And again, don't look to tomorrow or the next day or next week for something to manifest itself from your networking. Just trust that it's building over time, and it's going to come pay you back when you least expect it. And that's just how networking works.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AmSpirit.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connections. All rights reserved.